Just the other day, I had a fantastic question about stance switching. Should you be doing it? Should you be trying to utilize it? How is it going to affect your overall game? So today, we are talking about training and stance switching. So being able to fight in orthodox and then in southpaw and doing rapid switching back and forth is something that you see fighters like Israel Adesanya utilize many times in many fights. And this is a very interesting conversation. I have many thoughts on it, so let's dive right in. The first thing I want to say about stance switching is it can be very effective if used correctly, but keep in mind it is not for everybody, and it'll be up to you after this episode to decide if you're one of those people who are going to thrive being able to switch from one foot to the other, if you're somebody who's going to get hurt by it, because it works both ways. So let's start off and talk about the positives, the strengths of being able to jump from one foot to the other, being able to have the left hand in front and then the right hand in front. First of all, if you can become effective at this, you are a very valuable training partner. Somebody who can fight properly as a southpaw and then as an orthodox fighter is very, very important to have in your training camp. Number one, because it's difficult to find people who stand in that southpaw stance who are just really good. There's very few southpaws in most gyms. So if you have somebody who normally fights orthodox but then can switch and do the whole sparring session with you from that southpaw stance, especially if they understand the angles and the advantages of, stepping out with that cross, creating that opening. If you have somebody like that, it is so important, because we can't always find high-level southpaw sparring partners who are naturally in that stance. So we have to grab orthodox guys who can make the switch. And I have utilized this many times in training camps, especially case in point when I fought Sergey Adamchuk. I went, okay, this guy is a southpaw. The second time I went against him, I really need to understand the intricacies of how to beat this guy from that backward stance. But I didn't have anybody around to train with, so I had to go to particular training partners who fought orthodox most of the time, but were able to do a quick reversal and then fight in that southpaw stance and still give me good solid rounds. So if you want to be an asset at the gym, you want to help your training partners, then yes, it's a very good idea to practice switching from here to here, because then you can play the southpaw when you have training partners who have opponents with that southpaw stance. The next reason to get very good at being able to switch stances is you become a very dangerous offensive fighter. Now, of course, that's only if you're doing things really, really well, but people who are standing in this angle, who are hitting from here, their left hook is slipping around the back of the guard, but then very quickly they can throw a shot, angle off, and now make the lead hand, which was now before the backhand, now land behind the guard. Guys who can do that are very, very effective, very dangerous. They're constantly taking advantage of certain angles. My cross isn't landing, I jump, I switch my feet, I angle my head off, and now the southpaw cross lands. If that starts getting blocked defensively, I can go back to switch, and then throw my cross. So somebody who wants to be a very intelligent, a very dangerous fighter, catching angles and confusing their opponent, then this may be something for you to really work and get very good at. Now let's talk quickly about, for me, what the main downside of switching stances is and why I don't really do it. And this is just, like I said at the beginning of the episode, this is all personal. I have tried switching stances. I have tried fighting full rounds out of the southpaw stance. I have even switched stances in my amateur career mid-fight and then returned back to that orthodox stance. I tried it out, I experimented with it, and I went, okay, you know what? This isn't for me. And I'll tell you right now why it wasn't for me. Defense. That's all it came down to. From here, in this stance, I feel super comfortable, super defensively inclined. I can block shots, I can usually see shots coming. For some reason, when I just do this tiny little switch, it changed things up for me, and I feel like I get hit more often. My stance switches, the weight switches. Normally when I'm in my orthodox stance, I keep a little more weight over the back foot, but for some reason, I feel a little bit more comfortable as a southpaw putting weight over the front foot. So I find that low kicks are more difficult to defend, and the straight punches, for some reason, just slip down a little easier. Now that I know that, and I get hit more, I go, it's not worth it for me, because offensively, I have not become much more dangerous as a southpaw fighter. If anything, I am less dangerous, and my defense gets compromised, so really it's not worth it for me. So you guys can assess that as well. If you feel like when you switch stances you're getting hit more often, then no, maybe it's not for you. One other positive that I forgot to mention which is really good to keep in mind, and I used to train this all the time before my legs were very well conditioned, is I always went, you know what, if this leg takes a pounding in a fight and I can hardly walk, I need to be able to switch stances and now fight out of the southpaw stance and keep this back leg defended. You see people do this very often, although when you see people switch stances, it's usually the last resort. You can tell they can hardly stand, they switch their stance, and now all of a sudden you can tell they haven't trained here, and things just go way downhill. So I used to think that was something I needed to prep for, but then throughout the years I went, you know what? I'm just better off putting my energy into conditioning this leg and not worrying about switching that stance. Because practicing a stance switch, in my opinion, has one major setback, one major compromise, which I don't like. Now, I'm not saying don't practice it, because if you go in and you spar and you're like, okay, you know, left hand's in front, tap, tap, working away, I switch my stance, and then I'm beating the guy up and I'm able to catch lots of angles, I'm very evasive as I switch my feet, then that's great. But for most people, what they're gonna find is when they switch stances, they're never gonna get great at either. And you are better off, in my opinion, getting very good at one stance, getting very comfortable here, defensively and offensively. Now, once you are fantastic at this stance, yes, change it up, start experimenting, start trying this out. But don't be a beginner fighter, probably not even an intermediate fighter who is trying to constantly switch stances, because guess what? You still have lots of work to do right here. You still have lots you can learn, you still have lots to perfect. Once you've done that, then yes, play around. See if it works for you as you switch from side to side. But doing it before that, in my opinion, can hurt your overall performance, because you will not become an expert in either stance if you're spreading out your training energy. You're spreading out that ability to become amazing in one stance. So overall, I will not say yes or no to stance switches. I will say they are very effective. People who are experts at striking and who are very defensively inclined have showcased that being able to do this is a major asset. Like we said before, Israel Adesanya utilizes it so well. But we are not all Israel Adesanya. We are not all defensively as inclined as him. For myself, I find the stance switch means I end up getting hit more than I should. So it's not worth it for me. Plus, I took the time, I tried it out, and I went, you know what? Okay, I've done my time, and it's just not something that is in my cards to be fantastic at. But as I said before, you don't want to do this too early while you're learning. I did not try stance switches until I was probably about 8 or 9-0 in my amateur career, which means around that time I would have been about 24 years old. I would have been competing on the amateur circuit for about 4 years, and I had been training since I was probably really training, really hard, really focusing in, probably since I was about 14. So I had about 10 years of working away from my orthodox stance before I bothered switching. If you're in the first year, second year, third year, I would say just get really good at the stance you're supposed to be in, and then make the adjustments and try it out. And don't just go into sparring and try busting it out for the first time, because that's when you get clipped and you go down and you went, well, shoot, that was dumb. No, try your stance switches initially in shadow boxing, and then try them on the bag, and then try them on pad work days, and then eventually give them a shot in sparring and see how they go. That's my suggestion, guys. Stance switches, yes, they can be used, but you need to be very careful in actually trying to execute, and even more careful that they do not compromise your overall skill level in getting very good at one stance in particular. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a like. If you haven't already, join the channel and get subscribed. Until we see each other next time, train hard, and I hope everybody continues to enjoy the holiday season.